Hey everybody, it's Kathleen Gage, and I have a question. Have you gone plant-based and you're going, how the heck do I make these menus? How do I make food taste good? If you're like me, you've gone through that. Well, today we have a solution for the biggest problem that most people have when they go plant-based vegan. They want to know, how do I cook and how do I make it flavorful to the point that my family actually wants to eat it? Well, today I'm really, really excited to have my featured expert, Camy Arriola, and she has a yay for Camy. She has a really awesome YouTube channel. And how I found her, I was on a 3-day conference. Sean Knoll was doing the conference, and her husband Tony talked about his wife being plant-based, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to his wife. Went and found her, found out she had a YouTube channel. He helps her with the YouTube channel, and the rest, as they say, is history. So with that, Camy, great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, I'd like to start with, what made you go plant-based, and how long have you been plant-based?
That is the question. I just to say this really quickly, before going plant-based, I worked at a company where I swear everyone was vegan, plant-based. I'm like, why on earth would you want to do this to yourself? But in the meantime, I was having a bunch of health issues, specifically with my digestion and eating. My stomach always hurt. I was lethargic, just not good. And it seemed as the years went on, it just kind of kept getting worse. I'd gone to doctors, I'd gone testing. Everyone's like, oh, you just have acid reflux or whatever, just take pills, whatever. And I didn't really like that solution. I felt a little bit lost, and ended up getting food poisoning, food poisoning isn't fun, but it ended up being a really great thing for me because it allowed me to do that 2-week cleanse that people suggest to do. Like, well, cut everything out that you think could be hurting your stomach for 2 weeks and then reintroduce it and you'll know right away. Well, the food poisoning took care of that process for me. And I was able to find out right away when I started being able to eat normally again that dairy and meat were the cause of a lot of my problems. So just talking to Tony, processing it through, we were like, well, let's just try going vegan, fully plant-based for 3 months. Just commit to ourselves to make some changes, 3 months, see how we feel. And it was a life changer. And that was almost 2 years ago now. Just shy, and we just haven't looked back. So not only did I go plant-based, but my husband did with me, and we have never felt better. So
that's actually one of the things I hear from people. They get frustrated because their spouse won't go plant-based, and what I tell them is just go at your own rate. And if people are meant to go plant-based, they'll see what's happening to you. Which you had. Well, one thing, you keep a memorabilia, if you will, of the day that you went plant-based. And the story I recall you telling me is you took one for your husband. It's like you got the food poisoning. You were in London, I believe.
Yes.
And tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was joking because I actually have the ticket of the official date of when I went, because it was our last day. We went on a trip to London. Last day, we're like, let's hit the Tower of London. There's a fish and chips shop right outside, so don't eat the fish and chips outside of the Tower of London. And I thought it looked a little funky, the fish. I'm like, it's under the hot light. I'm a little sketched out. I don't really want it, but Tony got them. And I didn't. I just had gotten French fries or something. And as we were walking, he's like, I don't know if I really like this that much. I was like, oh, I'll give it a try. I really do love fish. And come to discover, you can't smell or taste bad fish. So had no indication that it was bad, but I traded him. I was like, I'll eat it for you. And come that night, I realized what a mistake that was. But again, it was silver lining because it ended up being really a great thing. So I don't know if I should be mad at him or if I should thank him.
Oh, how could you be mad at Tony? He's such a sweet guy. At least the perspective that we all have. He's, behind the camera, and, we're all like, oh, Tony. And he does his Tony's tip of the day, and just a great guy. Now, I know that the two of you actually have had some positive health benefits from going plant-based, and I definitely want to talk about that. And we're going to talk about your YouTube channel, how you started it. It's a food show. So I'm really excited about that. Let's start with what happened health-wise to the two of you.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't know, when you talk about plant-based diet, everyone's like, did you lose weight? Whatever. We did. Just to kind of preset that first and foremost, both of us have lost about 25 pounds, which is pretty incredible because it wasn't, for me personally, just to to share a little bit of transparency, like I've slowly gained weight as I've gotten older and have never been able to actually keep weight off, no matter what diets I tried and things like that. So losing 25 pounds was huge for me. I've never been able to do that in my adult life. And what was crazy about it is I wasn't trying to do it. I wasn't going on a diet. I was hoping I would get healthier from it. Of course, like, gosh, I'm eating vegan. Like, hopefully, like, there's some positive change. But both him and I, the weight came off probably in about 6 months' time. We just naturally lost 25 pounds without really adding in exercise or anything else, simply just making the same recipes that I was already making, but swapping out the ingredients for fully plant-based ingredients. So there was that. Obviously, our energy levels went up. We were both feeling really well. We were sleeping better. So some basic things like that. And then for me personally, I had already gone to the doctor and always had slightly high blood pressure, not to the point where they were wanting me on medication, but every year it seemed to be heading that direction. My triglyceride levels were elevated always. And I have a history of diabetes in my family, like type 2 diabetes and heart attack. So it was always a little bit like concerning for me, like, oh no, as I'm getting older, I'm like slowly heading that direction. So also just on paper, my triglyceride levels are normal. My blood pressure is normal now. My vitamin levels are actually normal with the exception of a couple of supplements that I take. So it's pretty cool to see for me. Not only did I lose weight, which I feel like is what a lot of people notice more, actually, like physically, my body is healthier than it was. So that was super encouraging and exciting for me because, again, my health just seemed to be like a battle that I was losing more and more as I got older. And I was so frustrated because I would go to the doctor, I would get test results. Nothing was really conclusive as to like what was wrong. I just progressively was getting less healthy as the years went on and gaining more and more in weight as the years went on. And it seemed like I had no control. I didn't know what to do. So this was a pretty huge victory for me, honestly, just to be transparent. It's because for the first time ever, I felt like, oh my gosh, I actually know what the problem was and I've been able to fix it. And then of course it's a journey. Everything's not perfect and I still have other changes that I want to make, but it's heading in the direction where I finally feel like I know and I have control over how my body feels, which is amazing.
Well, and what a great age to go plant-based, because I was 64 when I went plant-based. And I have to say, it's like I'm reversing the aging process. You know, I go on runs every day. I recently started the 75 hard challenge, which you have to work out twice.
75 hard challenge.
Yes. And I blame Sean for that. It's like he was talking about it. It's like, what's this 75 hard? It can't be that hard. Well, I've restarted 2 times so far. And yesterday it was because I forgot to take the picture. But, you know, I look at, it's crazy. But, you know, I look at your skin, it's so clear. And that's something that a lot of people notice is they get clearer skin, they have more energy, they have more focus, just all. And right now, because of the pandemic, to be able to have the consistent moods, that's a huge one. Now, with going plant-based, have you always been somebody who enjoyed cooking, or was that something that you picked up as a result of going plant-based?
Yeah, great question. Yes, cooking has been, before leading up, I was taking like master classes online and really starting to get into cooking flavorful food. For me, it was kind of something that I just decided, you know what, I'm really passionate about this and I really enjoy doing this for me. And cooking wasn't a huge thing in my family necessarily. Like my mom didn't cook a ton. My grandma was always a pretty good cook, but she lived far away. So it was something that I was able to just kind of do that I genuinely enjoyed. And I kind of took ownership of it the longer I was married. I feel like Tony and I got married when I think he was 19 still, and I had barely turned 20. So we were young. And just to give context, I'm like a couple months out from turning 30. So it's crazy to be coming up on our 10-year anniversary, but I was young. I didn't know how to cook. And the longer time has gone on, the more I'm like, I really love cooking. I love doing this and making really delicious, tasty food, I think, is specifically what I've always loved.
That's awesome. And I want to remind people that I'm talking with Camy Arriola, and she's got a phenomenal YouTube channel, the PlantBased Kitchen. I encourage you to go there. We'll put the link below in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, and hit the bell notification so you can get notified when we put other episodes up. If you're listening to this on iTunes or any other platform, I encourage you to leave a review and a rating so that we actually are able to reach more people with our message about the plant-based lifestyle. Now, with your YouTube channel, not many people go from, oh, I think I'll start cooking plant-based to starting a YouTube channel. How did that all happen?
Yeah, I think it was just, I think for me, I was so encouraged that I finally had control over my health. And when I would tell people in my life, yeah, I've gone plant-based, they were like, oh yeah, cool, good for you, whatever. And then a few Thanksgiving passed. I was able to cook for my family like I had normally done. It was actually a tradition that I would cook Thanksgiving dinner for family. And then I cooked it fully plant-based with the exception of a couple chickens. I did make a few chickens for the meat eaters, so it wasn't completely shocking. But I actually had snuck and done everything plant-based. And people didn't know. And I was like, yes, I've done it. Like I've tricked them all into thinking they ate real butter and real cheese and all the yummy things for Thanksgiving. And I think that that's kind of where the shift happened is like, I want to share this with people because I think there's a lot of stigma that comes with eating plant-based. For a various number of reasons. Like I said before, I had a lot of vegan coworkers. I'm like, God, I could never go without ice cream and cheese. Like, how do you live life? But as I started, already loved cooking, right? Before I went plant-based and then making the switch, it was relatively easy for me. And I say that with a grain of salt. I know it's not easy for everybody, but truly I just went to work and did research to figure out how can I make all the same recipes that I love already making that are hard. I know I can throw them together easily on a weekday night when I'm like super slammed with work. I just focused on making the things I was already used to, just using plant-based ingredients. And so there's a little bit of trial and error with like, okay, I want to have cheese sometimes. How do I find a really yummy plant-based cheese? And I would try different brands at different stores and stuff that I can get my hands on until I found one I really loved. But other than some of that trial and error, it was actually relatively easy. And so I tried to just incorporate it with the lifestyle that I was already used to, just using different ingredients so it wasn't that big of a shock to my system and my lifestyle. I think I started with dairy first. And then I think I started with meat first because that was just like a no-brainer. Like, I'm going to cut this out. And then it was dairy because dairy is kind of hard. It's in a lot. So I did do it over the course of a few weeks. But I just try to keep it simple for myself. And I think a lot of people, when they make the switch, they want to have a whole new list of recipes and they want to cook all these things with all these like exotic ingredients that they've never cooked with before. And I think if I was to even just like quickly give someone an encouragement, if you're thinking about making that switch, is like, how can you do it and keep your lifestyle as similar to what you're doing now as possible? So it's not so drastic and hard to maintain long term. You can make those small changes over time.
Well, give us some examples of those small changes, because prior to going plant-based, I didn't like to cook. It was not something that I enjoyed at all. And now I actually really enjoy it, but I keep it relatively simple. I love my crock pot. I haven't gotten one of those. What's the Instapot? Haven't gotten one of those yet because there's a part of me that's, what if it explodes? But, that's my one big fear. It's like, it's going to explode. But what would you say are some simple tips and strategies you can give people who are making that change over to plant-based to keep it really simple?
Yeah, I think this one kind of depends on where people live, because I'll have to be transparent. I think depending on where you're at, there's more readily available vegan options over others. So I think familiarizing yourself where the vegan section in your store is, it's usually where the tofu is. If you ask someone like, where's your tofu? Usually they'll group the vegan stuff there, so you can figure out what do they have vegan? Do they have hot dogs? Do they have cheese? Do they have tofu? Like what's your options? So kind of sussing out what your options are in the store. where to find certain replacement ingredients. Also, I would encourage people to kind of look locally to see what you can eat out. I think there's a caveat with that because over time I have found that I eat out less and I tend to buy more whole ingredients instead because they actually tend to be cheaper, which I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that in a second.
Absolutely.
But I think first and foremost, it's like, what can I easily get my hands on that are plant-based so I can swap out some of what I'm already used to, so you're not feeling like there's like such a deficit. So, okay, well, when you're exhausted and you don't want to cook at home, like what options do you have to potentially eat out? Where can you find plant-based ingredients in your stores so you know where to kind of shift your normal store routine to start looking for ingredients, and you kind of know if there are recipes that you do like, what are your options to replace some of the ingredients. So a lot of times when I look on Pinterest even to find recipes that I want, I'm looking for food that I enjoy eating. Like for example, I do not like kale. I am a vegan plant-based eater. I don't really like kale. So I'm not going to be looking for a kale salad recipe. I love pad thai. So I'm going to look for a pad thai recipe. Can I cook this easily with not that many ingredients so my bill isn't going to be through the roof? And can I cook something that I actually enjoy? I know there's a lot of caveat with that as far as like how much things are processed and different things, but I feel for myself personally, if people can start off by eating food they're relatively used to that just uses different ingredients, it's a very good stepping block to say, wow, you know what? I actually really do like plant-based food. Maybe I could keep doing this. And you could start heading the direction of, well, I don't know if I could cook tofu because that's crazy and I don't know what to do. Like, that's okay. Maybe you don't cook tofu. There are plant-based meat replacements out there, you know, gosh, help me, Beyond Burgers.
There's Beyond Burgers and Beyond Meat, and they had a huge IPO about a year ago, and I was fortunate enough to get in on that IPO, so it was a good choice.
So there's a lot of really great alternatives in the stores that, like, for me, that's where I started off. I have slowly gotten more, I guess, healthy over time and eat more whole foods than I did when I first started.
Right.
Part of that is my own health journey. I've actually found that the wholer the food is and the more in its raw state, I guess, less processed, that I can eat it, the better I do feel. So even if I eat, for example, Oreo cookies are vegan, but Oreo cookies don't make me feel very good. So
absolutely,
maybe when I first got started, I would eat more Oreo cookies because I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to cut out everything and feel like I'm just eating kale all the time. So I'm going to eat an Oreo cookie.
Right.
So over time, you know, I've made additional adjustments, but that's where I personally started. Is what can I easily get my hands on that's not super drastic from what I'm already used to?
Well, and those are good recommendations because I know when I started, I went completely into whole food, plant-based, and I actually dropped too much weight. I got pretty thin, and I've dropped about 35 pounds from where I started, and that wasn't my heaviest weight. And I've been a yo-yo dieter all my life, and I finally gave up on diets. I did it because I had inflammation. As I was getting older, I was feeling sluggish. I was starting to feel my age and what I assumed I should be at 64 years old. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't want to be like what my mother was at 64. I just don't want to be like that. And so I started researching and I went completely whole food, plant-based. And I really got to a point that people were saying, you're looking kind of gaunt, you're looking a little too thin. And so I had to look at that and make sure that I was getting enough calories. And I understand you and your husband have, actually, you could almost call it a fetish for tofu. I mean, it's like you guys love tofu. I think you're even going to write a book on tofu or some crazy thing like that. Tell us why you love tofu so much.
Okay, so kind of going back to what I said before, like in my personal health journey, there are the meat replacers. There's a lot of the like cheese, vegan cheese and stuff, but a lot of that tends to be pretty processed still. And my body personally doesn't really like processed food, even if it's vegan processed food. So over time, tofu has been a staple that I've really loved because I get a lot of great protein from it. It has a lot of good vitamins that I know my body needs to be mindful of what I'm actually putting into it. But it removes a lot of the processed chemicals, I guess you would say. You can pretty much, you're like eating soybeans. And so tofu, also the reason I'm passionate about it is because it's very cheap. So if we want to talk about also, I think that's another stigma is like, gosh, I just can't eat plant-based because it's so expensive. Well, getting tofu is way cheaper than getting chicken even in the store. And
Right.
chicken's probably on the cheap end. So for me, being budget conscious is something that we are always trying to keep an eye out for. I don't want to have a massive bill either. So tofu is just like, it's nutritious, it's cheap. Once you figure out how to cook it, I think that's why I'm like passionate about telling people about it, is because there's a little bit of like a prep process and spice. Like you want to throw some spices in there.
Mm-hmm.
You want to marinate it. That's going to really help a lot. I've gone to restaurants and ordered tofu and been like, can I get some salt? Like, did you guys do anything to this? This is kind of gross. So I think it's one of those things where there's a big stigma with tofu because it's like weird, and people that aren't vegan or plant-based don't usually eat tofu, but it's actually super healthy and very cheap if you're trying to keep your budget low.
Absolutely. And speaking of cheap, I really would like to talk about the budget conscious side of going plant-based, because I know right now a lot of people are really strapped for funds. I mean, it's tough times for a lot of people, and a lot of kids who used to be able to get their meals at school are not able to do that right now because they're doing distance learning. What would you say are some staples that people should have in their kitchen that will help them to stay plant-based and on a good budget?
Yeah. Oddly enough, I would say that buying food in its wholer state versus a lot of the processed stuff actually keeps your bill low.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of a lot of the Facebook vegan groups and communities, which I would highly recommend for people too that are starting this journey out. You can ask questions. You have a group of people around you that are like, hey, try this, or I love this brand, or, they'll help support you. So that's super huge. And being a part of those, a lot of people say, gosh, it's too expensive. My bills are huge. And I literally ask people, what are you buying? Because the Beyond Meat, the processed stuff, the vegan cheeses, any other processed stuff that is just like a plant-based version of what you're already getting actually tends to be what's going to rack your bill up. Whole vegetables and yes, carbs, things like rice or couscous or beans, legumes, all of these like really healthy nutrition packed ingredients that you can use tend to be the cheapest. So obviously like beans and rice and things like that are relatively inexpensive. And depending on what store you go to, I found that produce actually is quite inexpensive.
Absolutely.
So you can kind of test different things out to see what your regular go-to things are. But for me, I probably always have rice. I always have black beans. I always have chickpeas. I always have Brussels sprouts and broccoli just to like throw in the oven really quickly. I always have tofu, of course, and I will have a couple other things that I know I like to flavor. So certain spices and things that I like to use, like smoked paprika and garlic powder and of course salt and pepper. So I kind of have my spice basics, and then like I usually have avocados in the house too. We want to start talking about like healthy fats and nuts and cashews and almonds. So I just found over time, like I just kind of have those things readily available. And when it comes to keeping your bill low, I would highly recommend doing research before you go in. And like, yes, it might be a little bit of time you're putting in ahead of the game, but you can start growing your list of staple recipes. What's easy for you to cook? What do you love to eat? And what uses a ingredients list that's not 12 miles long?
Right.
And if you plan it out in the week, back in 2011, my husband and I were in college, in Bible college in Australia. We're so broke. And so what I would do is I would put together a recipe list that specifically used the same group of ingredients, just a bunch of different ways. So I could go to the store and buy as few ingredients as possible and just make it work throughout the week. And I would apply that very much to this. If you're getting, if you're going to cook 5 different dinner recipes this week, but every single one of them requires completely different ingredients, your bill is going to be very high. But if you can get some that are using some of the similar spices, and few of them are using tofu, so you can just use, cut a block of tofu in half and use half of it this night and half of it the other night. If you can use those ingredients sparingly and get the most out of that ingredients list and cook 5 different recipes using that same list, that will help you keep your bill very low.
I have to tell you, I'm so proud because I just did this. I made a big batch of vegan spaghetti last night. I had my sister-in-law visiting, and so my mother-in-law, my wife was there, and my sister-in-law and myself, and I made this huge pot of spaghetti. And now tonight, with what's left over, I'm going to make baked what are bell peppers. I'm going to do baked bell with the sauce, and I'm going to add some other ingredients, probably tofu, to do baked bell peppers. And
what a great idea.
The whole meal last night, I think for the whole batch was, I figured it $12 to $13, and that is part of what we're having tonight. So it's very inexpensive. Now, one of the things you mentioned, you use extra virgin olive oil. I'm a no oil person. I actually get my fats from avocados and nuts. So, and I actually, in my Facebook group, which I encourage people to join, that Plant-Based Eating for Health. It's a nice Facebook group. I always encourage people to try to move away from that, especially as we get older with heart issues. What can somebody do to replace cooking with oil to a non-oil diet?
That's a good question. I don't know if I actually have ever tried.
Well, let me give the chef some recommendations. What I do is I simply eliminated it when it would call for oil. I tried recipes without putting any oil at all, like sauteing. I saute with water now. And it's amazing. It's somewhat of an acquired taste. What's that?
It kind of steams it a little.
Yes, it does. And what's interesting is I can tell it's incredible. I used to use so much oil in the way I cooked when I did cook. And the other day I went to a restaurant, I ordered a vegan meal, and they kind of patched it together, and they brought me vegetables. I said, absolutely no butter. I'm completely vegan. Please, no butter. Well, they put oil on it, and it was so rich. And I was just like, oh, I should have mentioned no oil too. So you really acquire a taste for a no oil diet. But I would love for you to share about your YouTube channel. Like, again, it's the Plant-Based Kitchen. We'll put the link below. And for those of you just tuning in, I'm talking with Camy Arriola, and she is the founder of the Plant-Based Kitchen. She has a wonderful YouTube channel. So tell us about what people can expect when they find you on YouTube.
Yes. I think it's just me sharing my passion for delicious food. And I'm actually glad that you brought up even just some differences. 'Cause I think that's the thing about the plant-based community is there are people that do this journey a little bit different. And I think what I want to be able to present to people is breaking through the idea that plant-based food isn't going to taste good, and being able to provide really good base recipes that, being a vegan or plant-based eater, like, over time, you become aware how to replace certain things. And so whether you don't like to eat a bunch of carbs, and maybe that's something that you've strayed away from, whether you're not using oil and you're having to replace that different ways. Also, I think another thing too is being aware that, like, tofu is a huge part of my diet and I love it and my body is okay with it. Same thing, like certain oil. I am careful about what type of oil I use because that makes a difference for me. But soy is fine for me. It's a huge piece of my diet and what I eat, obviously, with all the tofu. But there's plant-based eaters out there that don't like tofu either.
Right.
So I tried to provide a pretty vast array of different types of recipes that people in the plant-based community can use as a really good base flavor profile for something that they're cooking. You can cook it as is, or if you find something on there that you kind of want to swap out. For example, I have fried rice on there. And someone's like, oh, all those carbs. I'm like, girl, just use cauliflower. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Or you don't want to use oil in there. That's okay. You can swap that out. So I think that's what's really amazing about the plant-based community is we've been able to figure out how to eat healthier food. And we also each have different dietary needs as well. You know, again, tofu is really, really great for me, but there's people that they're allergic to it and it doesn't do well for them. So I think it's being able to kind of push through that barrier to be like, there's so many options. There's so many delicious recipes. I'm really passionate about flavor. So I take a lot of time and energy to try to get a really good base level flavor. It's sweet, it's salty, maybe a little spicy. So it's got that great depth of flavor in there. So when people cook, they can actually enjoy the food and maybe be able to sneak it into some of the meat eaters out there and have them be like, wow, this is plant-based. This is actually really good.
It's amazing when people find out, oh, I just ate a plant-based meal. So in addition to your YouTube channel, how can people find you?
Yes. So I do have my own plant-based Facebook group. You can just find it at the Plant-Based Kitchen if you search in Facebook. I kind of keep that posted with a lot of my recent videos that I'm coming out with. And then again, just building that community. So you have this group of people, just like what we're doing here, where you can chat about different ideas and bounce things off of each other and continue that health journey. I am on Instagram, just my own personal. It's CJ Arriola, Arriola. And if you guys cook any plant-based recipes, tag me and share them with me. I'm like super excited to see what you guys are all doing. And then of course, YouTube at the Plant-Based Kitchen. And then I have my blog and my website at thepbkitchen.com, and it's all connected to Pinterest and all of that.
Wonderful.
So kind of in all of the verticals there, but really, again, just excited to be a part of the community.
We'll make sure that that's all in the show notes. I want to make sure that people have access to your information because, you know, when I first met Tony virtually and he mentioned his wife was a plant-based eater and a plant-based chef, I was like, oh, I've got to meet this woman. One thing led to another, and quickly I booked you for this show because what you're doing is so important for people, especially in light of all the health issues people have. And, you know, you're so smart that you started at your age because unfortunately, as we get older and older, it's not as easy to reverse things that we've put decades of bad behaviors into. So I really appreciate that. One of the things I love about being plant-based is I am getting such an education on just health, compassion to animals, the environment. And when you look at the overall picture of everything, it makes sense that the closer to nature we eat, the healthier we're going to be in mind, body, and soul. Camy, as we're closing, what final thoughts do you have for people?
I would say just something that I'm personally excited about that I'm working on is a Thanksgiving ebook. So we can kind of hit the end of the year strong, hopefully be able to have some good time with our families and gather together despite all of what's going on in the world. So keep an eye out for that. I hope to just kind of be able to equip people with basic Thanksgiving, like traditional American Thanksgiving recipes that are all fully plant-based.
Nice.
So you guys can enjoy those. And then I would just love for people to connect with me online. I mean, I'm just so inspired to hear so many different stories out there, why people are going plant-based, hearing different ideas and things. Like I learned things from you today on the call, you know, just figuring out different ways of living. Because I know, like, I think that there's a lot of documentaries out there and information about even like the health industry and the food industry and what we're being told that's okay to put in our bodies versus what we should be. Right. And if I were to leave people with one final encouragement, I would say, you know, physically, spiritually, the question I think to ask ourselves is, what does our body need? So that's kind of where my journey started, is figuring out what my body needs is not what I'm giving it. I don't feel well. And obviously the food poisoning was a huge piece of me figuring it out. But even before then, I started a food journal and I was already starting to cut certain things out that I had found. When I eat this, I do not feel well. When I eat this, I do feel well. And starting to shift my thinking to pay attention to my body and what it needs and what it wants me to put in it and what it doesn't want me to put in it. And so if I was to leave people with an encouragement also just to even get started, is like, yes, there's resources out there about the health industry and the food industry. And as we kind of touched on, even religion and different reasons why spiritually you might want to do things and being passionate about the environment, your why is going to be so powerful. But if I can encourage you to even just start within yourself to ask why, like, what does my body need? And like, why am I going to make this change for myself? That's going to be so powerful. And you can just start by food journaling and figuring out what makes you feel well and what doesn't, and focus on adding more of what makes you feel well in rather than focusing on what you should cut out. And I think that journey applied physically and then also spiritually too is going to be super powerful for your life. So
awesome. Well, Camy, this has been delightful. And I so look forward to digging into your YouTube channel, trying some recipes so that I can just become a better cook and enjoy my food more and surprise people with plant-based meals. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. And this is Kathleen Gage with Plant-Based Eating for Health, encouraging you, go out, ask that question. What does my body really need? What is it going to, what can I do to really support the temple that I've been given and live fully in these times of uncertainty and just bless people with the food that I cook? Have a great day.
Thank you for your commitment to an ethical life through plant-based food choices. The kind of choices that are kind to your body, the environment, and most of all, animals. Be sure to leave a review and rating of the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show.